There are 7 rock stars who embody each of the deadly sins, but the opposite is true with 7 more matching each heavenly virtue. Today we'll be comparing them all, starting with charity versus greed. Charity is defined as the voluntary giving of help to those in need, and no one fits this better than Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. In 2011, he was just hours away from getting on a flight for a European tour when a dying fan's wish was to meet him.
Lead singer of Linkin Park, one of the world's most celebrated rock bands, in what is a 14-year-old boy's dying wish. Chester Bennington doing so just a few hours before flying off to Paris and a European tour.
So it's nice to be able to come down here and say hi and, hopefully make him feel good today.
Visiting people in need was a regular occurrence for the band, but Chester was also very open about mental health and destigmatizing the negativity around it. It's something that he dealt with his entire life, and he wanted his fans to never feel alone.
All the kids out there who feel like they've been pushed down, picked on, looked at funny, feel strange because you're different, you know what? That makes you cool. Don't let anybody make you feel bad for being who you are. Trust me, it gets better.
And back in 2004, Linkin Park also founded Music for Relief, a nonprofit dedicated to helping survivors of natural disasters. They've raised millions for over 30 disasters, and even took the time to visit the families directly affected. Chester tragically passed in 2017, but a charity named the One More Light Fund was founded in his memory, ensuring his legacy of giving would go on forever. Chester is truly as charitable as they come. However, the opposite is true for Gene Simmons, who embodies the deadly sin of greed.
Are you enjoying making a ton of money?
It is my favorite thing in life.
Greed is an intense desire for something, especially wealth or power. And if you know anything about Gene Simmons, you'll know he's the master of merchandising. Throughout the decades, he's licensed the Kiss brand to over 3,000 products. It started with simple things like comic books and lunchboxes, before becoming insane with Kiss condoms, credit cards, even a Kiss coffin for after you're dead.
How many caskets did you sell?
I don't know, but they wrote a big check.
And Gene has never been shy about his love for money. In fact, he brags about it every chance he gets.
Put a dollar sign on the Kiss empire.
We make a living.
500 million. 750 million. $1 billion.
Give me a cookie.
$1 billion.
Anywhere from 1 to 5.
Gene perfectly captures greed, but we have to compare chastity versus lust next. And while many rock stars are guilty of lust, few have a track record as crazy as Nikki Sixx's. Lust is defined as a very strong sexual desire, and Nikki was an absolute hedonist in the 80s and 90s. He and Tommy Lee were infamous for their love of groupies, and even one time made a disgusting bet. Who could go on the longest without showering while still pulling chicks? This of course ended with Nikki losing, and a girl puking on him for how disgusting he was. And Vince Neil also recalled a pretty wild story about Motely Crue. We were always fucking these other chicks at the studio and backstage. So we would take Tommy's van to buy these egg burritos and then rub them on our crotches to cover the smell of the girls we had just fucked. We never thought about just going into the restroom and washing our dicks. And if that somehow wasn't crazy enough, Nikki's first wife was a Playboy bunny, his second wife was a Playboy bunny, and during an interview with Howard Stern, he even admitted to trying to sleep with Tommy's mom.
Did have parties and stuff at Tommy's house or at our apartment or wherever, and I think I was drunk one night and was kind of
And was Tommy pissed
Tommy
at you?
didn't mind?
No, he didn't care.
He doesn't care.
He calls me dad now.
In 1985, he said, "I love groupies. Without groupies, God, I probably wouldn't have been a musician. Probably go home and be a farmer or something." Nikki was actually the songwriter behind Dr. Feelgood and Girls, 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 which makes a lot of sense now. But the opposite of lust is chastity, and Brian Welch from Korn takes this one with his journey as a born-again Christian. Chastity is the ability to say no to unlawful intercourse, but in another sense staying pure and refraining from negative influences. Now, Brian co-founded Korn, but throughout their rise to fame, he massively struggled with a drug and pornography addiction.
Or I would just get on my computer and go to the sickest world of internet porn or whatever and get sucked into that for hours. But when you're in it and the high on the meth, it's like you don't feel it, but then afterwards, the next day, I just feel like the sickest pervert.
Brian stated that he and his wife at the time had a shared addiction, which later led to them divorcing. While Brian was able to gain sole custody of his daughter, he went on to struggle with substance abuse for many years.
So I ran from that new person that I started to want to and work on it, then I ran from it and went the other way. Went deep, dark into drugs and just hired nannies, and when I'd come home, I'd kind of put on the role. I'd be on drugs, but I'd be goofy dad, making breakfast, and meanwhile I'm up all night, and it was so dark. But
it wasn't until he was invited to church by a friend that he'd soon have a spiritual awakening leading him to Christianity.
I felt like Jesus came in and put his arms around me. I didn't see anything, but it was just it was a life-changing event. and I felt like I was at home for the first time.
While this was incredible for Brian, fans of Korn and the members themselves were shocked when he announced he was leaving the band. It was sad for many, but it was amazing for him. He focused on dedicating his life to God, was around full-time to raise his daughter, and eventually 8 years later would rejoin Korn as his new self. But it's time for us to dive into kindness versus envy, and while envy is a deadly sin, the rock star behind this one is completely justified. Envy is described as a painful desire for someone else's success. This fits Dave Mustaine from Megadeth, founding member of Metallica, who was fired and then slandered by the band.
I've been erased from any involvement. The quotes that I was never meant to be in here anyways, I was just filling a spot, I was just a temporary guy, I was a loser and a drunk, I got kicked out. All the horrible things that were said immediately after my firing, I agree, I should have been fired because I was dangerous because of my disease.
See, when Metallica formed in the early 80s, they were really focused on making it, but Mustaine was partying a little too hard behind the scenes. This led to him getting into fights, clashing with other members of the band, before eventually showing up drunk to record at the studio. Dave was then fired, but went on to express frustration with how things went down. They became one of the biggest bands in the world, and they waste their breath trying to discredit me, saying Dave's not a good guitar player. I think I wrote many of the songs that made you famous, so you should probably recheck that bullshit statement. Now, he did get songwriting credits on the first album, but he asked Metallica to not go on using the stuff he had written previously.
The thing that bothered me the most was I had all my music and I left it behind and I said, don't use my music. And of course they did. I used it on the first record, on the second record. There's parts of my music on a song on the third record. All the solos on the first record are mine, except that they're just performed by Kirk, and close, but not the same.
While this may seem like a sad story for Mustaine, the moment allowed him to go on to launch Megadeth, one of the most successful thrash metal bands in history. And when asked nowadays about everything, Dave seems pretty happy with how things turned out.
I just look at it like where I'm at right now. 20 in Metallica, and now look at me, I'm 60 in Megadeth, and I'm a Grammy winner, I'm a New York Times best-selling author. The slightest deviation from where I was going could have ended me up anywhere else in the world.
Opposing envy is kindness, and a lot of rock stars fit this one, but Eddie Vedder has been known for being an extremely kind person for over 3 decades. Kindness is the quality of being friendly and considerate. Well, back in 2016, a woman shared her struggles online. She said she was a single mom of 6, unable to buy Christmas presents, and on the verge of getting evicted. I'm trying my best. I pray every day, and now I'm begging for help. I know it's not about the gifts, but they're kids. I'm such a failure right now. Now, Eddie saw this story and was moved by how close it felt to his own experiences. It brought back memories of his difficult childhood, so he sent the family $10,000 to ensure they'd have a home for Christmas. Not only this, but a GoFundMe went on to raise an additional $20,000 for the family as well. Eddie and his wife also co-founded EB Research. This is a nonprofit whose sole purpose is to help children with a rare and painful skin condition.
When you see the intense pain that these kids go through, the baths and the bandages, and it's about as hard a thing to watch as anything I've ever witnessed in my life.
And since the Vedders' contributions, the organization has gone on to make scientific breakthroughs while partnering with a ton more celebrities. Beyond that, there are countless examples of Eddie making time for fans, being a voice against war, and a huge supporter of planet conservation. He even took one of the biggest nights of his career, Pearl Jam's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, just to speak about climate change.
Climate change is real. That is not fake news, and we cannot be the generations that history will look back upon and wonder, why didn't they do everything humanly possible to solve this biggest of crises in our time?
We could be here all day listing the kind things that he's done, so let's jump into our next comparison, Diligence versus Sloth. Sloth is a deadly sin, but the person behind this one was never known for infamy. Sloth is a lack of physical or spiritual effort, aka giving up on your passions and not doing anything with life. Unfortunately, this perfectly describes Syd Barret of Pink Floyd. Syd was the original frontman and primary songwriter, but after years of LSD use and mental health struggles, he cracked in 1967. The band described Barrett's behavior as erratic, he started to miss rehearsals, and even struggled to play on stage. So by 1968, he was replaced by David Gilmour. This led Syd to work on a couple solo albums, but these were also super difficult to get recorded.
Both of us made his solo records with him, helped produce his solo records after that point, and he was it was pretty kind of disjointed and difficult to get him to do anything.
While the albums achieved success, Sid retired from the music industry not long after and became a hermit for the rest of his life. In fact, he was so unrecognizable, the band didn't know who he was when they saw him again.
And then we were all unbelievably shocked at his appearance.
I mean, I didn't know it was him.
You know, this slim, elegant, bedraggled and dazed person that I'd last seen had turned rather balloon-shaped and no eyebrows and not much hair.
Pink Floyd's album Wish You Were Here as a tribute to him, with Shine On You Crazy Diamond being a direct reference to his genius.
You know, he was a charming, ebullient, talented friend, and I miss him. But I've been missing him since 1968.
Sid sadly passed in 2006, but will always be remembered for shaping one of the most iconic rock bands of all time. Now, the rival of Sloth is Diligence, and Harvard grad Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine is as hardworking as they come. Diligence is defined as persistent hard work and attention to detail, and while Morello's entire career is a masterclass in dedication.
I was the only black kid in an all-white town. I was the only anarchist at a conservative high school. The only heavy metal shredding guitar player at Harvard University, and the only Ivy League Star Trek loving nerd in the world's biggest political rock rap band.
Not only is he a self-taught guitarist, but he literally innovated the way the instrument's played. His scratching and sliding techniques are easily some of the most recognizable sounds of Rage.
Wolves on parade.
And at one point, Tom even stated he was practicing 8 hours a day while enrolled at Harvard. Yeah, he actually has a degree in political science, and he's been putting it to use in his lifelong commitment to activism. In 2002, he co-founded Axis of Justice with Serge Tonkian, a nonprofit that fights for social causes, from tackling issues like immigration, advocating against the death penalty, and even empowering activism. Despite all the success, Tom has never slowed down. After Rage disbanded, he joined Audioslave, collabed with Springsteen, and even formed Prophets of Rage. And he somehow still found time to help with movie soundtracks like Iron Man while also appearing in it. Tom has proven that Diligence isn't just about hard work, it's about using your talents to leave a lasting impact on the world. And now we have the heavenly virtue of humility going up against the deadly sin of pride, with pride meaning an excessive focus on oneself marked by arrogance, superiority, and the lack of humility towards others. And while Axl Rose is one of the most gifted singers of his era, this talent has led to an ego over the years that fans and peers haven't loved. Chinese Democracy being a great example. This album was one of the most expensive in history, costing over $13 million to make, all because Axl was overly meticulous. And yeah, great art takes time, but this took an insane 15 years to release, with Slash, Izzy, and Duff having no part in it. Instead, Axl used 15 different studios, 17 musicians, 10 producers, and 29 assistants, while trying to do most of the arrangements himself. Now, obviously, the album wasn't his proudest moment, but his pride really got the best of him when it came to their Hall of Fame induction.
Guns N' Roses is going into the Hall of Fame, but without Axl Rose. The former band's frontman says he is not attending and is even declining his induction into the Hall. Axl doesn't even want to be inducted at all.
In Axl's defense, he stated this was due to touring with his current lineup, but people saw it as egotistical, especially when Slash and Duff were there to perform. But on the flip side of pride, we have Chris Cornell, an absolute rock legend known for his humility. Humility is defined as having a modest view of oneself, free from arrogance, and valuing others' contributions. And this definitely embodied Chris.
I used to work, like when I had a regular job, I was like, started out as a dishwasher in a restaurant because I have no education. So that's what I was qualified for.
Despite his humble beginnings, Chris went on to become one of the most influential people in rock with Soundgarden and Audioslave. But even with all the fame, Chris always remained extremely down to earth. Eddie Vedder recalled a story from the early days in Seattle where Chris was already famous, but just wanted to chill with friends over anything else.
We'd go mountain biking, or we would chase the dog in the rain with drinking shitty beer. And wow, this is what like a quote unquote he was like legit rock star.
Right.
This is what he's doing. He's chasing a dog in the rain with his buddy on a Saturday night with a 12-pack of Schmidt.
Chris's lyrics were often about personal challenges, which made a lot of people resonate with his vulnerability. This openness towards self-improvement really showed that he wore humility on his sleeve. But our next comparison pits two very different traits against each other: patience versus wrath. Wrath is an intense anger or rage that is often uncontrolled or destructive. And this accurately describes Vince Neil of Motely Crue. In 1984, he was arrested for crashing a car while drunk, resulting in the death of Hanoi rock drummer Nicholas Dingley. Now, in the 80s, people drove drunk constantly, and even other members of Motely Crue admitted to it.
The thing is, I
been in a bad car accident, and so had Tommy previous to that. And we were both very drunk when it happened, and then that happened to Vince, and it's something that we said, you know, it's time to like straighten up about that.
But while they seemed to learn a lesson from this, Neil would go on to have many more reckless controversies. In 2002, he was arrested for assaulting a record producer. In 2003, he was accused of assaulting a sex worker. In 2010, even after the accident almost 3 decades prior, he was arrested yet again for a DUI. Then in 2012, he punched a fan at a concert, and this was somehow followed by domestic violence charges, and perhaps the most bizarre of all, an altercation with Nicolas Cage. Allegedly, a woman wanted Cage's autograph, and Vince just attacked her out of nowhere. And while Neil's wrath is destructive, patience is calm and deliberate. And Maynard James Keenan has demonstrated the virtue of patience better than 99% of rockers out there. Now, many people know him from Tool, but Maynard also balances 2 other groups, A Perfect Circle and Pussifer. Juggling 3 bands already takes a lot of patience, but Keenan also waits years for the other members of Tool to craft the instrumentals before he can even start working on the vocals.
I almost have to let them take the first step first and then react. And allow them to see the reaction so they can build on the reaction. So
the longest Tool album took 13 years, but Maynard practices patience through his hobbies as well, which are also multi-year endeavors. Not only is the guy a black belt in BJJ, which takes years of training, but he also owns several vineyards and makes his own wine. From the way he approaches music to his hobbies, Maynard is the definition of patience. Finally, we have Temperance versus Gluttony. And for Gluttony, we have to go back to one of the most OG rock stars of all time. Gluttony is known as the excessive overindulgence of food, alcohol, drugs, women, or just defying the principles of self-control. Now, plenty of rock stars fit 1 or 2 of these, but Elvis Presley quite literally embodied them all. During his time in the US Army, Presley became heavily addicted to amphetamines. This dependency lasted throughout his entire career, and it led to a near-fatal overdose in '73. But that's just the start, because in 1977 alone, he was prescribed 10,000 doses of amphetamines, narcotics, and sedatives. Obviously, this is a crazy amount of drugs to prescribe someone, which led to the doctor's medical license being revoked. But in a shocking twist, it was later revealed he prescribed 19,000 doses to Elvis in just 31 months. Although, it wasn't just the drugs that led to Presley's decline in health. He was also known for his horrible eating habits, averaging over 10,000 calories a day. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches fried in butter. His breakfast would have piles of bacon, sausage, eggs, and grits, not to mention he never skipped dessert. All of this led to Elvis passing at age 42, with his estimated weight being 350 pounds. Elvis's appetite wasn't just limited to food. His excessive lifestyle and years of drug use make him a cautionary tale in overindulgence. The opposite of gluttony is temperance, which is the practice of moderation and self-restraint in all aspects of life. Despite being a member of Rush, one of the biggest rock bands of all time, Geddy Lee never fell into the typical rock star lifestyle. In the 70s and 80s, bands were infamous for their debauchery behind the scenes, but Rush always stayed focused on the craft. During an early tour with Kiss, Geddy recalled that the guys would invite them out to party, but they just go back to their hotel room and watch Twilight Zone instead. And Geddy's shown this discipline his entire career. Not only is he an incredible frontman, but he also plays multiple instruments and even switches between them live. If you find Geddy off stage, his temperance is just as evident. He's been married to his wife since 1976, and in 2021 he was given the Lifetime Achievement Award for his extensive philanthropy. Through moderation, discipline, and his focus on excellence, Geddy shows temperance can be a way of life, not just a virtue.